You can keep your title as Vice President of Finance, Julian, but my daughter Chloe is taking over as Chief Financial Officer starting today. To make this structural transition work cleanly within our operational budget, we need you to take a 20% pay cut effective immediately. Those were the exact words spoken by my boss, Gideon Montgomery. At 8:30 on a rainy Monday morning, I stood at the head of the mahogany table inside the executive suite at Summit Enterprises, entirely motionless. For 14 long years, I had poured my soul into this corporate logistics firm, single-handedly scaling it from a bankrupt startup into a sprawling $120 million international logistics empire. I had walked into this morning meeting expecting to sign paperwork for my long-promised promotion to permanent chief financial officer. Instead, I found myself staring across the table at Gideon's 24-year-old daughter, Chloe, a recent graduate with zero corporate finance experience and no understanding of trade compliance. Chloe sat back in an executive chair, scrolling on her gold phone while twirling a lock of hair around her finger. She looked up, flashed an artificial smile, and spoke with unearned privilege. "Thanks for being so understanding, Julian. I need your corner office cleared out by mid-morning. It has the best natural lighting for my video updates, and honestly, your traditional suits don't fit the modern aesthetic we want for our executive suite. You can set up your laptop down at the transit cubicle near the shipping docks while you train me over the next few months." The surrounding boardroom fell into dead silence. Other department directors seated around the table immediately lowered their eyes, far too cowardly to lock eyes with me, or challenge the founder's blatant nepotism. If you are listening to this right now, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button, because I am about to show you exactly how a toxic corporate hierarchy destroys itself from within when arrogant executives underestimate the most competent strategist in the room. What Gideon and his pampered daughter failed to comprehend was that by stripping away my authority, they had just triggered a catastrophic, irreversible chain reaction. My name is Julian Vance. I am 51 years old, and as Vice President of Finance and Acting Chief Financial Officer, I was the mechanical engine holding Summit Enterprises together. In that precise second, a wave of icy clarity washed over my mind. The surge of anger in my chest instantly froze into pure tactical strategy. I did not raise my voice or slam my fists. I did not shed a tear or beg for my position. "I see," I said, keeping my voice calm and unbothered. Gideon let out a relieved sigh, pleased that his loyal workhorse was taking the public demotion without making a scene. "Excellent, Julian. Chloe has a substantial onboarding package and an $80,000 signing bonus, so adjusting your salary helps us balance administrative allocation cleanly. We knew we could count on your unshakable loyalty." That was his first fatal mistake. He mistook my professional discipline for submissive compliance. I quietly glanced up at the digital clock on the wall. The red numbers indicated it was 8:55 a.m. I capped my fountain pen, slid it into my breast pocket, and closed my leather portfolio with a soft click. I stood up tall, smoothing down my suit jacket. "I won't be needing the transit cubicle near the loading docks, Chloe," I said quietly, looking directly into the eyes of the girl who believed an empire could be inherited over morning coffee. Then I turned my gaze toward Gideon, the man I had protected from financial ruin for over a decade. "And I certainly won't be adjusting my budget to float your daughter's signing bonus." I turned on my heel and walked calmly toward heavy glass exit doors. Gideon frowned, leaning forward with growing irritation. "Julian, where do you think you are going? The meeting is far from adjourned. We still need you to walk through trade ledgers before 9:30 a.m. I offered no response. I pushed open the glass doors, stepped out into the corridor, and walked past my corner office without stopping for personal belongings. I entered the waiting elevator and faced forward. As doors slid shut, locking me away from the boardroom, the clock in the lobby clicked over to exactly 9 o'clock a.m. I reached into my coat, pulled out my encrypted corporate phone, and powered the device off completely. I murmured to myself that Gideon Montgomery had no idea that by forcing me out, he had signed the immediate death warrant of his own company. To understand why my walkout at precisely 9 o'clock a.m. was an absolute blow to Summit Enterprises, you must look at the immense labor I poured into the firm over 14 years. When I first accepted Gideon's desperate offer, Summit Enterprises was not a $120 million global player. It was a chaotic, hemorrhaging four-person shipping brokerage operating out of a rusted warehouse in an industrial park, with leaking roofs and broken heating units. The business was facing imminent bankruptcy within 30 days. Its bank accounts overdrawn and freight carriers threatening asset seizure. Gideon Montgomery was out of options back then. He broke down in tears during our initial interview in that freezing warehouse, admitting he had no idea how he was going to meet payroll. I took a massive professional gamble. I turned down lucrative financial management offers from established Wall Street firms and chose to stay and build Summit from the ground up. I worked grueling 90-hour work weeks, sleeping on a folding cot in the back storage room. I single-handedly built their entire financial infrastructure, migrating operations off paper ledgers onto a custom automated database. I managed every single penny of volatile cash flow that kept the lights burning during those perilous early years. However, that relentless dedication exacted a devastating personal price. I sacrificed my late 30s and early 40s to construct Gideon's fortune. I missed my younger brother's wedding because an international cargo ship was detained at a foreign port on a Saturday night and required immediate authorization. I skipped family holidays, birthdays, and social milestones, constantly telling myself personal sacrifice would be rewarded. Ultimately, my intense focus on the company led to a quiet, painful divorce. My former spouse told me. She felt married to an invisible ghost who only returned home to sleep before vanishing back to the office. I surrendered personal happiness and postponed starting a family because I prioritized Gideon's operational emergencies over my own life. I even used my personal credit score to float primary payroll 14 years ago when a major client defaulted on a massive invoice, risking my financial future for a company in which I owned no legal shares. I vividly remember the brutal winter 7 years ago when the primary lending institution threatened immediate loan acceleration due to a regional backlog freezing our supply chain. Gideon was completely paralyzed by panic. His entire personal real estate portfolio was tied up as collateral. If the bank pulled the plug, he would have lost his home, vehicles, and standing. I did not hesitate. I stayed awake for 72 consecutive hours in a freezing office, sustained by black coffee, manually restructuring our debt portfolio and negotiating directly with bank attorneys. I saved his personal fortune from total annihilation. Throughout every historical crisis, Gideon constantly leaned on me as his indispensable financial savior. He would grasp my hand, look at me with tears in his eyes, and tell me I was the true co-founder of Summit Enterprises. He explicitly promised me, year after year, that once the company crossed the $120 million revenue milestone, my loyalty would be rewarded with a permanent chief financial officer title and a 10% equity stake. Having officially shattered that exact financial milestone last quarter, largely due to my meticulous tax and capital structuring, I genuinely believed I was finally standing on the precipice of achieving my ultimate goal. The sudden betrayal in the boardroom cut directly to my core, because it shattered 14 years of unshakable trust, sitting inside my vehicle in the rain-slicked parking lot, watching water streams flow down the glass. Cold reality finally crystallized in my mind. I realized with sickening clarity that I had traded my youth, marriage, and personal well-being for hollow, manipulative promises made by a founder who never viewed me as an equal partner. He viewed me merely as an operational engine designed to build generational wealth for his family and fund an extravagant lifestyle for his spoiled daughter. I reached into my briefcase, touched the leather-bound journals containing 14 years of strategic financial notes, and a quiet smile spread across my face. I realized that while I had built Summit's structural foundation, I had quietly retained sole possession of the master keys to the vault. In the corporate world, arrogant leadership frequently commits a fatal error. They confuse high visibility with actual operational value. Gideon and Chloe saw me as an easily replaceable administrator who merely typed numbers into spreadsheets, an expensive line item they could downsize to fund Chloe's executive lifestyle. What they failed to understand was that I had not merely tracked Summit's capital, I had engineered the invisible. highly complex financial mechanics that prevented the entire $120 million enterprise from collapsing into ruin. Over my 14-year tenure, I had quietly established technical and contractual safeguards, hardwired exclusively to my professional credentials, creating an operational ecosystem that literally could not function without my daily validation. The first hidden pillar of my leverage was a proprietary dynamic tax routing software algorithm that I had coded entirely from scratch during late nights at the office. This was not off-the-shelf software. It was an adaptive financial routing system integrated directly into our global shipping compliance architecture. The algorithm automatically calculated international maritime tariffs and rerouted freight documentation in real time to shield Summit Enterprises from aggressive cross-border customs penalties. What Gideon and the board never realized was that this single proprietary software solution quietly saved the firm over $10 million every single fiscal year, because I held sole copyright protection over the source code under federal intellectual property laws. Specifically 17 United States Code Section 106. I was the only person who understood how to execute mandatory weekly compliance security patches. Without those manual updates, international shipping operations would automatically revert to standard penalty tax rates, instantly erasing profit margins. However, that annual $10 million savings was secondary to the second financial asset under my exclusive control, the company's operational lifeblood. To keep a global logistics firm functioning, you require immense daily liquidity to cover fuel contracts, dockage fees, and maritime insurance. I had spent 3 years establishing and maintaining a massive $50 million rolling line of credit with Metropolitan National Bank. Because Summit's physical assets were heavily leveraged, the bank's underwriting committee had issued this critical facility under 2 non-negotiable conditions. First, it required my specific financial compliance license as sole authorized administrator. Second, it required a daily physical security sync generated by an encrypted biometric hardware security token residing on my personal keychain. Every single morning before 8:45 a.m., the bank's automated risk management servers pinged my hardware token to verify that the acting chief financial officer was personally supervising capital allocations. If that token failed to respond, or if my biometric signature was absent from the security portal, the bank's automated protocol was absolute under their commercial lending covenant. The bank's credit risk algorithms would flag corporate accounts, automatically freeze the entire $50 million rolling credit line, and throw Summit Enterprises into an immediate state of technical default. Gideon was so detached from underlying mechanics of his business that he genuinely believed our multi-million-dollar bank transfers occurred automatically through basic internet banking. Completely oblivious to the black biometric token sitting in my pocket, the third element of my leverage resided within core client relationships. I was not merely managing internal ledgers. I was the primary executive manager for Summit's top 4 international sovereign wealth fund clients. These 4 massive institutional accounts represented over 70% of the firm's total annual operating revenue. These foreign fund managers distrusted Gideon, whom they viewed as an erratic salesperson. They placed their trust entirely in my analytical precision. Because of this deep professional relationship, I had personally negotiated every clause of their multi-year service contracts. During those negotiations, I had insisted on insertion of a devastating legal safeguard, a strict key personnel clause. This clause explicitly stated that if I and Julian Vance ever ceased to personally oversee, audit, and validate their capital allocations, their multi-million-dollar service agreements would become instantly voidable at their sole discretion. Clients retained absolute legal right to pull all capital and terminate contracts with a mere 24 hours written notice. Gideon and Chloe had spent months celebrating our $120 million valuation, completely blind to the fact that 70% of that revenue was legally bound to my continued presence in the building. As I pulled out of the parking lot on that rainy morning, I unclipped the biometric hardware token from my keys and placed it safely inside my briefcase. I looked at my watch, knowing the bank's automated risk system would attempt its mandatory morning ping, only to encounter total radio silence. To understand why I walked out of that building without guilt, you must examine the absolute disrespect that unfolded during the 48 hours leading up to that boardroom confrontation. The breaking point did not begin on Monday morning. It began late Saturday afternoon when automated internal auditing software flagged an alarming sequence of anomalous corporate credit card transactions. A corporate card newly issued to Chloe Montgomery had been used across major European capitals for tens of thousands of dollars in personal expenses. The detailed ledger showed luxury hotel suites in Paris, designer boutiques on luxury shopping avenues, and private charter flights, all crudely categorized in our financial system as essential international logistics research. On Sunday afternoon, driven by my obligation to protect the firm from financial misrepresentation and potential tax fraud liability, I requested an urgent private meeting with Gideon in his office to present the evidence. I expected him to be appalled by his daughter's blatant misappropriation of corporate funds, or at least appreciative that his chief financial officer had caught the compliance breach before an external regulatory audit occurred. Instead, the instant I placed itemized ledgers onto his desk, Gideon's face flushed with deep defensive anger. He slammed his hand onto the wood, dismissing financial reports with absolute contempt. "How dare you spy on my daughter's executive development spending, Julian?" he barked, his voice filled with hostility. "Chloe is the future leader of this company. If she needs to experience luxury lifestyle markets to expand our global freight branding, her expenses are completely authorized by me. Frankly, this petty obsession with receipts proves what I have been thinking for months. You have reached your professional ceiling here. You are a competent numbers manager, but you lack the modern aesthetic, executive posture, and global vision required to represent Summit on an international stage." I sat there in total shock, as the man whose personal fortune I had repeatedly saved attempted to gaslight me regarding my own competence. Before I could respond, Gideon reached into his desk drawer and slid a revised 4-page executive employment agreement across the table. It was a formal demotion wrapped in dense corporate legal jargon. The new contract completely eliminated my annual performance bonuses, revoked my primary administrative clearance on all corporate bank accounts, and explicitly demanded that I transfer all master passwords, encryption keys, and proprietary software access to Chloe before Monday morning. Furthermore, it contained a clause attempting to restrict my future employment options across the shipping industry. I stared at the man who had promised me equity for 14 years and realized that every word of gratitude he had ever spoken was a calculated lie. That was the exact moment my internal psychological commitment shattered. The misplaced loyalty that had chained me to Summit Enterprises for over a decade completely evaporated, replaced by cold detachment. I did not argue. I did not remind him of the 72 hours I spent saving his personal home from bank foreclosure 7 years ago. I simply accepted the document, stated that I would review terms over the weekend, and exited his office. I spent the remainder of Sunday evening ensuring that my personal and proprietary systems were legally protected, leaving every corporate record exactly as required by law without committing a single act of illegal sabotage. I did not need to break the company. I merely needed to allow its new leadership to govern it. The final insult occurred on Monday morning, just 15 minutes before the boardroom meeting. I was reviewing trade manifests at my desk when Chloe walked into my office without knocking, holding an iced macchiato in one hand and a crushed cardboard box in the other. Without greeting, she dumped the box directly onto my desk, spilling dozens of crumpled coffee-stained personal receipts across my paperwork. "Here, Julian," Chloe said with a dismissive wave. "My father said you are going to be assisting me now. Go through these personal expense receipts and enter them into the corporate travel portal before lunch. Make sure they are approved as tax-deductible operational research, and try to be efficient. I want my new office completely cleared out by noon." I looked down at coffee-stained receipts on my desk, then up at her arrogant face. Any lingering hesitation or residual regret I held completely vanished. This final degradation erased my remaining doubts, proving beyond doubt that remaining in this toxic environment was professional self-destruction. I quietly gathered receipts back into the box, remembered precise technical language of our bank's risk covenants, and finalized my silent counter-strategy for the meeting. Back in the boardroom, as Chloe smirked and Gideon leaned back in his leather chair waiting for me to submit, I did not react with anger. I lifted the cardboard box of personal receipts, placed it firmly back on the center of mahogany table directly in front of Chloe, and offered a calm, polite smile that caused Gideon's confidence to falter. "Good luck with the structural transition," I said, my voice perfectly level. It was precisely 8:50 a.m. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving heavy silence behind me. I had exactly 10 minutes before my self-imposed 9 o'clock deadline, and I intended to execute every action with mathematical precision. What they failed to understand was that I had spent Sunday night preparing legal operational maneuvers. Inside my office, I logged into my terminal. I did not delete company files, nor did I tamper with official databases. That would constitute illegal destruction of corporate property under federal law, and I was far too strategic to grant them legal leverage. Instead, I systematically logged out of every primary banking portal and encrypted operational database. I initiated a secure wipe of my personal browser history, saved shortcuts and personal financial macros, ensuring that 14 years of specialized efficiency tools vanished from that terminal forever. Next, I executed the critical operational step. I walked over to the server bridge inside my office closet, unhooked my biometric hardware security token, and slipped it into my briefcase. This small black USB device was registered under my personal financial compliance license with regulatory authorities, not the corporation's asset registry. I was legally entitled to retain my personal credential hardware. With 3 minutes remaining, I opened my secure email client and drafted a clear resignation notice. I wrote, "Please accept this communication as formal notice that I am resigning from my position as Vice President of Finance, effective immediately at 9 o'clock a.m. due to a material breach of implied employment agreements by executive leadership." I copied the head of Human Resources, Gideon, and every member of the board of directors, then hit send. Finally, before closing my briefcase, I picked up my cell phone and dialed a direct number I had kept stored for over 2 years. It was the personal line of the chief executive officer at Apex Global, Summit's primary competitor. Apex had spent 18 months attempting to recruit me, offering massive compensation packages that I had repeatedly declined out of misplaced loyalty to Gideon. The chief executive answered on the second ring. "Julian, what brings you to call me on a Monday morning?" he asked. "I am calling to inform you that as of 9 o'clock a.m., I am officially a free agent," I said calmly, "and I am ready to negotiate." "Name the time and place," he responded instantly, his enthusiasm obvious. "Set the meeting for 2 o'clock p.m. today at your corporate headquarters," I replied, "and make sure your senior legal counsel and acquisition directors are in the room. I am bringing a $70 million commercial opportunity with me." I disconnected the call, grabbed my briefcase, and walked out to the elevator just as the digital clock hit 9 o'clock a.m. By Tuesday morning, less than 24 hours after my walkout, the fragile financial structure supporting Summit Enterprises collapsed into total chaos. Sitting in my home study, sipping black tea, I monitored public trade tracking databases and corporate regulatory filings. I knew precisely what was occurring inside Summit's headquarters. At the stroke of midnight, Metropolitan National Bank's automated risk management servers executed their mandatory ping to verify the presence of the acting CFO's biometric hardware token. For the first time in 14 years, the server received no response. Because my biometric signature was completely absent, the bank's automated risk engine triggered instantly. By 6 o'clock a.m. on Tuesday, the bank formally issued an emergency technical default notice against Summit Enterprises, automatically freezing their entire $50 million rolling line of credit. Inside the corporate office, Chloe Montgomery was blissfully unaware of the impending catastrophe. She arrived at Executive Suite at 9:30 a.m., carrying a designer handbag exuding unearned authority. Her first official duty as chief financial officer was to approve a routine $7 million wire transfer to clear critical maritime fuel payments and dockage fees for our international fleet. However, when she logged into the financial terminal and attempted to authorize the transfer, the interface rejected her credentials instantly. She tried again, typing rapidly, her face turning pale as a flashing red security warning dominated the screen. Access denied. Line of credit frozen. Mandatory biometric compliance validation missing. She was completely locked out of primary operational banking network. Within hours, real-world operational consequences reverberated across globe. Because $7 million fuel wires failed to clear by morning deadline, furious international port authorities and fuel suppliers immediately issued complete operational freeze on all Summit vessels. In major commercial ports from Rotterdam to Singapore and Houston, massive container vessels carrying tens of millions of dollars in time-sensitive freight were abruptly halted at anchorages, legally prohibited from discharging cargo. Summit's international logistics network ground to a catastrophic halt. Multi-million-dollar supply chain that I had spent 14 years refining became paralyzed, leaving dozens of global manufacturing clients stranded without raw materials. But operational paralysis was merely beginning of their nightmare. Automated bank default notice did not merely freeze cash flow. It automatically triggered electronic notification to top institutional investors and primary sovereign wealth fund clients under debt covenants. By 11 a.m., managing directors of our top 4 sovereign wealth fund accounts received automated red flag alerts on their terminals, informing them that designated key personnel officer had officially separated from Summit Enterprises. Remembering that these 4 accounts represented over 70% of Summit's total operating revenue, foreign fund managers did not hesitate. Recognizing that capital was no longer protected by my analytical oversight, they immediately invoked strict 24-hour exit clauses embedded in service agreements. One after another, formal legal notices of contract cancellation flooded into Gideon's email inbox, revoking capital allocations and terminating multi-year logistics agreements effective immediately. In less than 4 hours, $70 million in annual recurring revenue vanished from Summit's balance sheet. By noon, Executive Suite was in a state of absolute panic. Corporate phone lines were ringing continuously, with screaming calls from international port directors, stranded ship captains, and terrified board members demanding explanations. Gideon Montgomery, finally realizing an existential disaster was unfolding, burst into finance department, screaming for his accounting team. He expected to find accountants resolving a minor technical glitch. Instead, he found his daughter Chloe weeping hysterically at her mahogany desk, completely overwhelmed by terror. She was surrounded by printouts of error code she could not interpret, utterly incapable of reading a standard general ledger or comprehending how to navigate a credit default. Every ounce of her unearned executive arrogance had completely dissolved into helpless panic. Gideon stood frozen in center of room, staring at flashing red warning screens, cold sweat pouring down his neck as he finally grasped scope of his error. He turned to remaining junior finance staff, his voice trembling with desperation as he ordered them to pull up my emergency contact records. He began screaming at his team to track down my home address and private cell phone number, suddenly realizing that his entire $120 million empire was evaporating by minute. Throughout Tuesday afternoon, my cell phone vibrated continuously on my desk. It did not stop for 5 hours. Gideon called me exactly 42 times in a single afternoon. When I declined to answer, a flood of desperate text messages and voicemails accumulated on my phone, offering a fascinating look into corporate collapse. Initial voicemails were aggressive, filled with legal threats and executive rage. He screamed that I was violating fiduciary duties under corporate law, threatening to launch immediate litigation against me for damages unless I returned to office to hand over banking encryption codes. However, as hours passed and global cargo ships remained immobilized, his posture dissolved completely. By 4 p.m., aggression was gone, replaced by pathetic begging. "Julian, please," his voice cracked in a late voicemail. "The bank refuses to speak with Chloe. Sovereign wealth fund directors are pulling all capital. Please, just tell me how to unfreeze credit line. We can negotiate any salary you want. Just call me back. I did not return his calls. Instead, I silenced my phone and spent afternoon enjoying long overdue afternoon at a tranquil day spa. For first time in 14 years, I was not monitoring trade manifests or resolving artificial corporate emergencies. As I relaxed, a profound sense of peace settled over my mind. I had given that firm my youth, marriage, and health, and they had attempted to strip away my dignity for family nepotism. Watching their empire fracture under weight of their own arrogance was most satisfying professional vindication imaginable. By Wednesday morning, corporate crisis reached its absolute peak. I received an urgent formal email from Chairman of Summit's Board of Directors desperately requesting an emergency Zoom conference at 10 o'clock a.m. When I logged into virtual meeting room from my laptop, I was not sitting in a transit cubicle near a shipping dock. I was sitting comfortably in executive suite at Apex Global's corporate headquarters, holding a warm cup of coffee. On screen, entire board of directors looked terrified. Gideon sat in center, looking as though he had aged 15 years in 48 hours. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, and hands shook uncontrollably. Chloe was completely absent from call. Gideon did not attempt to maintain an authoritative posture. He practically wept on camera. "Julian, thank God you joined us," he stammered, voice trembling. "Look, we made an unfathomable mistake on Monday morning. Boardroom meeting was a complete miscommunication. We value your leadership more than anyone in this industry. Board has unanimously authorized executive restoration package. We are prepared to offer you title of Permanent Chief Financial Officer, base salary of $650,000 per year, and immediate 15% voting equity stake in Summit Enterprises. We will comply with any condition you set. Chloe will step down immediately and serve merely as junior clerk under your direct supervision. Please, Julian, we need you to sign banking compliance restoration documents today." I took a slow, deliberate sip of coffee, looking directly into camera lens. Board held their breath, waiting for my loyalty to kick in and save them. But loyal worker they had exploited for 14 years no longer existed. "Your offer arrives 14 years too late, Gideon," I said, voice calm, carrying quiet finality. "I decline your offer entirely, and you should know that yesterday at 2 o'clock p.m., I signed executive agreement to become senior managing partner at Apex Global. Furthermore, because of your catastrophic mismanagement, directors of your top 4 sovereign wealth fund clients have already executed contract cancellations with Summit. They are currently sitting in Apex's main conference room, finalizing historic new logistics agreements directly with my new firm. Have a wonderful fiscal quarter, gentlemen." I clicked red button, terminating Zoom call mid-sentence, leaving entire Summit board staring at blank black screen as their company collapsed into insolvency. Aftermath of that walkout was swift, brutal, and permanent. Unable to unfreeze credit line or recover 70% of lost operating revenue, Summit Enterprises entered a rapid financial death spiral. Without my proprietary dynamic tax routing software to manage international tariff exposures, operational margins were completely wiped out by back taxes, shipping delays, and severe maritime customs fines. Within less than 5 months, once mighty firm succumbed to total insolvency and filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy liquidation. Board of directors and furious investors stripped Gideon Montgomery of remaining shares and forced liquidation of Summit's physical assets to pay off creditors. Gideon lost personal fortune, luxury estate, and professional reputation constructed over decades, forced to watch his life's work get dismantled by bankruptcy trustees. As for Chloe, corporate aspirations were permanently destroyed before they ever began. She became an infamous cautionary tale throughout logistics sector, permanently blacklisted from holding any financial executive role again. Her unearned arrogance cost her family everything. Meanwhile, my transition to Apex Global was a resounding success. As senior managing partner, I was granted complete operational autonomy, a massive compensation structure, and genuine professional respect earned through decades of dedicated work. Top 4 sovereign wealth fund clients transferred entire $70 million annual business directly to Apex Global on my very first week. logistics industry immediately recognized where true financial intelligence of Summit had resided all along. However, my victory was not merely about personal wealth or professional stature. The instant my executive contract was finalized, I utilized my position to execute rescue operation for dedicated professionals left behind. I systematically reached out to my former junior finance team at Summit, specifically Elliot, Nora, and Gavin, brilliant analysts forced to endure Chloe's abusive incompetence. I hired every single one of them at Apex Global, rescuing them from sinking company, and provided them with 45% salary increases, comprehensive benefits, modern working environments, and professional dignity consistently denied under Gideon's leadership. Together, we engineered a superior logistics network that dominated international market within our very first quarter. The final scene takes place on another rainy Monday morning, exactly 1 year after I walked out of that toxic boardroom. I am standing before floor-to-ceiling glass window inside my penthouse executive office at Apex Global, overlooking bustling city harbor below, completely at peace. I look down at cargo ships moving smoothly through water, holding a warm cup of black tea, a tranquil smile on my face. There are no frantic phone calls, no manipulative threats, and no artificial emergencies to resolve. My time is finally my own, and I am surrounded by an elite team that respects my expertise rather than exploiting my commitment. I frequently reflect on profound lesson of my 9 a.m. walkout. True professional power never stems from a title bestowed by an ungrateful employer, nor does it come from sacrificing your personal life to enrich a manipulative founder. True power resides in intrinsic value carried within your own intellect, technical mastery, integrity, and refusal to allow anyone to treat you as disposable. When I walked away from that mahogany table, I did not have to actively sabotage Gideon's empire. My absence alone accomplished that result. My quiet, strategic walkout did not break their company. It simply exposed an undeniable truth to corporate world. I was never just an employee holding their machine together. I was the empire all along.